The corridor outside the royal sector of Apex Prime was so quiet that Wesley Fox could hear the faint hum of the station's gravity stabilizers through the floor beneath his boots. It was the kind of silence that made a technician very aware that he probably should not be there. Unfortunately for Wesley, the maintenance schedule insisted that he absolutely should be there. He walked slowly down the polished hallway, reading the glowing checklist on the small diagnostic tablet in his hand. Apex Prime was the crown jewel of the Illyrian Dominion, a colossal orbital palace that circled a pale gas giant like a silver moon. Everything in the station was immaculate: walls of reflective alloy, transparent ceilings revealing distant stars, and security systems so advanced they occasionally felt slightly offended when humans touched them. Wesley stopped in front of a large door inside. "Of course," he muttered. The door towered above him, smooth and seamless except for a small biometric scanner embedded beside the frame. A faint violet emblem shimmered above it, the royal crest of Queen Seris. Two Illyrian guards stood on either side of the doorway like statues carved from polished armor. Their long ears curved elegantly behind their helmets, and their golden eyes followed Wesley with the kind of calm suspicion normally reserved for people who accidentally delete entire databases. Wesley raised a hand politely. "Morning." Neither guard responded. "Good talk," Wesley said. He checked his tablet again. Biometric lock diagnostic, Royal Quarters access panel. Wesley scratched his short beard. "Who scheduled this?" he murmured. "And more importantly, who did I annoy to deserve it?" One of the guards finally spoke, his voice calm and deep. "You are Technician Wesley Fox." Wesley blinked. "That's what my mother keeps telling people, yes." "You are authorized to inspect the scanner," the guard continued. "Great," Wesley said. "That's comforting, because if I accidentally open the Queen's bedroom door, I'd prefer it to be officially authorized." The second guard's expression did not change, but his long ear twitched slightly. Wesley stepped toward the scanner. Apex Prime had thousands of biometric locks, but this one was special. The royal door systems used Illyrian genetic verification, technology far more sophisticated than a simple fingerprint reader. The scanner didn't just analyze ridges on skin, it checked biological markers, genetic structure, even microcellular patterns. In theory, only Queen Seris herself could open this door. In practice, Wesley was about to test whether the system could correctly reject everyone else. He pulled out a small handheld scanner and ran it over the panel. Blue diagnostic symbols appeared in the air. "All right," he said quietly, thinking aloud the way technicians often did. "Sensor alignment looks good. Gene recognition array is active. No tampering, no signal drift." He glanced back at the guards. "This part might look a little dramatic," he said, "but I promise it's standard procedure." One of them nodded once. Wesley placed his finger on the biometric plate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel lit up. A soft melodic tone echoed through the corridor. "Access verified." The massive door slid open. Wesley slowly lifted his finger. He stared at the scanner. Then he stared at the door. Then he looked back at his finger as if it had betrayed him personally. "Well," he said carefully, "that's new." Both guards stepped forward instantly, their hands hovering near the hilts of their energy blades. The security drone floating above the corridor activated with a quiet mechanical buzz. Wesley raised both hands. "Before anyone panics," he said quickly, "I would just like to say that I did not expect that to work." From inside the chamber, soft light spilled across the corridor floor. The royal quarters of Apex Prime were rarely seen by anyone outside the Illyrian court, and certainly not by maintenance technicians holding diagnostic tablets. A calm voice spoke from within the room. "Who opened my door?" Wesley froze. The guards turned instantly and stepped aside. Queen Seris stood inside the chamber, framed by pale violet light from the interior of the room. She was tall, poised, and unmistakably Illyrian, her silver hair falling across her shoulders, her long, elegant ears curving slightly behind her head. Her golden eyes rested calmly on the doorway, and then on Wesley. For several seconds, no one spoke. Wesley cleared his throat. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. "In my defense, the door opened itself." For several long seconds, the corridor felt strangely smaller, as if the enormous royal station itself had leaned closer to watch what would happen next. Queen Seris stood in the doorway of her chamber, her golden eyes fixed on Wesley Fox with quiet intensity. The soft violet light behind her illuminated the elegant curve of her long ears, which tilted slightly forward in what Wesley suspected might be Illyrian curiosity or the early stage of royal disappointment. Neither option felt particularly safe. Wesley kept both hands raised politely, the universal gesture of, "I promise I'm not attempting treason." "I realize," he said carefully, "that walking into a queen's private quarters without permission is generally considered bad manners." The guard captain beside him spoke immediately. Technician Fox placed his finger on the biometric panel for diagnostic testing. Seris glanced briefly at the scanner beside the door. Its surface glowed faintly, displaying a single confirmation message. "Access verified." Her gaze returned to Wesley. "You opened it?" Wesley nodded once. "Technically speaking, yes. You should not have been able to." "That," Wesley replied, "is exactly what I was hoping the door would demonstrate." The Queen stepped closer to the scanner. The movement was calm and controlled, yet it carried the effortless authority of someone accustomed to commanding fleets across star systems. She placed her hand on the biometric plate. The scanner chimed softly. "Royal access confirmed." The door slid fully open behind her. Seris studied the panel for a moment, then turned back toward Wesley. Her long ears shifted slightly, the delicate motion reminding him again how similar Illyrians look to humans, and how subtly different they were. "Explain," she said. Wesley glanced down at the diagnostic tablet still in his hand. "I would absolutely love to," he said. "Unfortunately, I currently possess exactly 0 explanations." One of the guards coughed, which might have been the Illyrian equivalent of suppressing a laugh. Wesley continued carefully. "The maintenance report flagged a minor calibration drift in the scanner sensor array. My job was simply to confirm the system rejected unauthorized users." He gestured weakly toward the open doorway. "In hindsight, the system appears to have taken a slightly different approach." Seris's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Illyrian royal biometric locks do not malfunction," she said calmly. Wesley nodded immediately. "Of course not." A small floating drone glided down from the ceiling and began scanning the panel with thin beams of blue light. The station's internal AI had clearly decided this situation deserved immediate attention. The drone projected a rotating hologram of the scanner's internal components. Wesley leaned closer, squinting at the data. "Huh," he muttered. Seris watched him. "You sound intrigued." "I'm a technician," Wesley said. "Being intrigued is part of the job description." He pointed at one line of floating code. "The system didn't glitch." The guard captain frowned. "Then why did the door open?" Wesley tapped the hologram. "Because the scanner believes my fingerprint is authorized." Seris folded her arms slowly. "That is impossible." "Statistically speaking," Wesley said, "I completely agree." The drone continued processing the biometric record, displaying several layers of verification data. Wesley scrolled through them with increasing confusion. "Okay, now that's interesting." Seris stepped closer. "What do you see?" Wesley turned the holographic display so she could view it. "The scanner doesn't just read fingerprints," he explained. "It analyzes genetic markers beneath the skin, cellular structure, protein patterns." Seris nodded once. "Correct." Wesley pointed to the verification result. "It thinks my biology matches the authorization template." The corridor became very quiet again. The guard captain spoke slowly. "That template contains only the Queen's genetic identity." Wesley smiled nervously. "Well, that's awkward." For a moment, Sarah simply stared at the display. Her long ears shifted slightly backward, as if adjusting to an unexpected sound. Then she looked directly at Wesley again, studying his face more carefully this time. "How long?" she asked calmly. "Have you worked on Apex Prime?" "6 months," Wesley replied. "And before that?" "Station maintenance on 2 transport hubs, a mining colony, and 1 unfortunate cargo vessel whose life support system and coffee machine were somehow connected." Seris tilted her head slightly. "You repaired both?" "Eventually." The guard captain exhaled slowly. The drone finished its scan and displayed the system log in glowing letters. "Biometric match confirmed, genetic compatibility detected." Wesley stared at the message. He blinked. Then he looked up at the Queen. "I'm going to say something," he said carefully, "and I want to be very clear that I personally do not believe it." Seris said nothing. Wesley pointed at the holographic display. "According to your security system," he said, "my DNA is similar enough to yours to open the royal door." The guard captain's hand slowly tightened on the hilt of his energy blade. Wesley immediately added, "Which I'm sure is just a software issue." Seris remained silent for several seconds. Then she said something very unexpected. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "it is not." Wesley blinked. "That possibility," or he replied, "is significantly more terrifying." Within 10 minutes, the quiet royal corridor of Apex Prime had transformed into the most awkward scientific conference Wesley Fox had ever attended. Floating scanners drifted through the air like curious insects. Portable consoles lined the walls. 2 additional security drones hovered near the ceiling, quietly recording everything. The royal guards remained perfectly still, but Wesley suspected they were only pretending to look calm. He sat in a chair that had been brought from somewhere inside the Queen's chamber, trying very hard not to feel like the center of an interstellar mystery. Queen Seris stood across the room beside a transparent diagnostic table. Her silver hair caught the light of the holographic displays floating above it, and her long ears tilted slightly as she listened to the rapid explanations coming from the station's chief science officer. "The biometric scanner did not malfunction," the officer said carefully. "Every verification layer confirms the result." Wesley raised a finger. "Before we go any further," he said, "I would like to officially request that the words biometric anomaly be used instead of royal genetic match. It sounds much less life-changing." No one laughed. The chief officer continued scrolling through data. "The scanner compares over 200 genetic markers when identifying the Queen. Technician Fox shares a significant number of those markers." Wesley slowly leaned back in his chair. "How significant are we talking?" The officer hesitated. "Enough to trigger authorization." Wesley stared at the ceiling. "Well, that's unfortunate." Seris finally spoke. "Run the deeper analysis." The officer nodded. Another console activated, projecting a rotating helix of genetic code into the air between them. The hologram was enormous, lines of glowing symbols spiraling slowly above the table. Wesley looked at it. Then he looked back at Seris. "Please tell me that thing doesn't mean what I think it means." Seris folded her arms calmly. "What do you think it means?" "It means," Wesley said, "someone is about to tell me I'm related to an alien queen." One of the younger technicians accidentally laughed. The chief officer cleared his throat. "The Illyrian Royal Biometric System is designed to recognize only one individual, Queen Seris." "Yes," Wesley said quickly. "That's the part I understood." "But," the officer continued, "the system also allows partial recognition for individuals who share specific hereditary markers connected to the royal lineage." Wesley blinked. "Why?" The officer answered without hesitation. "For succession verification protocols." Wesley sat upright again. "Oh, no." Seris's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem concerned." "I'm a maintenance technician," Wesley replied. "I fix air filters and door sensors. I am not emotionally prepared for anything involving royal succession protocols." A second scientist leaned closer to the console. "We're running a full genetic comparison now." The holographic helix began separating into 2 glowing strands, one labeled Illyrian Royal Genome, the other labeled Human Subject, Wesley Fox. Wesley stared at the label. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I preferred my life when I was just called Maintenance Guy." The analysis progressed slowly. Lines of code aligned, sections lit up. One of the technicians leaned forward in disbelief. "That can't be correct." Another checked the readings. "No, it is." Seris stepped closer to the display. "What did you find?" The chief officer spoke quietly now. "The compatibility markers originate from a very old Illyrian genetic program." Wesley rubbed his forehead. "Let me guess," he said. "Ancient secret experiment. Scientists mixing human and Illyrian DNA. Someone said, 'This is a terrible idea,' but they did it anyway." The officer looked surprised. "That is an accurate summary." Wesley sighed deeply. "I hate being right." The holographic display expanded again, revealing archived data pulled from the deepest layers of Apex Prime's database. Project Aurora, Interspecies Diplomatic Lineage Program. Date, 3 centuries prior. The room grew quiet. Seris studied the file with intense focus. Our ancestors attempted to create a bridge between our species, she said slowly. The officer nodded. The program was abandoned after the early trials. Wesley tilted his head. Abandoned how? No surviving subjects were ever recorded. Wesley pointed at himself. Well, someone forgot to tell my grandparents. One of the scientists snorted quietly before catching himself. Seris continued reading the data. Her expression remained calm, but Wesley could see the gears turning behind her eyes. Finally, she looked at him again. Technician Fox. Yes, Your Majesty. Where were you born? Earth, Wesley said. Small city. Very normal childhood. I failed 2 math exams and accidentally set my school's robotics lab on fire once. The officer glanced up. You set a robotics lab on fire? It was technically an electrical misunderstanding. Seris allowed the faintest smile to appear. Your life sounds eventful. Until about 30 minutes ago, it was mostly coffee machines and ventilation ducts. The main console chimed. The analysis had finished. The final report appeared in the air. Genetic cross-species markers detected origin. Project Aurora lineage sequence. Wesley stared at the message. Then he slowly leaned back again. All right, he said. Everyone looked at him. If someone could please explain why an ancient alien royal experiment is hiding inside my DNA, he said, I would greatly appreciate it. The floating helix of genetic codes slowly rotated above the diagnostic table, bathing the room in pale blue light. The symbols drifted like quiet stars, each one representing a fragment of a mystery that had apparently decided to land directly in Wesley Fox's lap. Wesley stared at the hologram for a long moment. Then he leaned toward the nearest scientist. Out of curiosity, he asked, how often do you discover that your maintenance technician might be the result of a 300-year-old alien experiment? The scientist adjusted his console. Rarely. That's comforting. Queen Seris remained focused on the data. Her long ears angled slightly forward, the subtle movement revealing intense concentration. The room around her buzzed with analysis drones and whispering technicians, yet she stood perfectly still. The Aurora program, she said slowly, was never meant to create rulers. One of the historians standing near the back nodded. It was an attempt to create diplomats, he explained, individuals who could biologically and culturally connect our species. Wesley crossed his arms. So basically, someone thought the galaxy needed a half-human peace ambassador. Not half, the scientist corrected. Mostly human, with embedded Illyrian genetic markers. Wesley tilted his head. That sounds exactly like half. The scientist opened his mouth to respond, then reconsidered. Seris turned her gaze toward the historian. Why was the program abandoned? The historian activated another archive display. Ancient Illyrian symbols filled the air. The early prototypes were unstable, he said. The genetic compatibility between the species was lower than expected. Many of the first subjects did not survive. Wesley grimaced. That's not my favorite family story so far. The historian continued scrolling through the record. Eventually, the Royal Council ordered the research sealed. The remaining samples were believed destroyed. Wesley raised a finger. I feel like the word believed is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A young technician glanced up from a console. Technically speaking, she said, your DNA suggests the sequence continued naturally through human generations. Wesley blinked. You mean someone 300 years ago accidentally started a family tree that eventually produced me? The technician nodded slowly. Yes. Wesley leaned back in his chair again. That explains a lot. Seris looked at him. What exactly does it explain? Well, Wesley said thoughtfully, my grandmother always said our family had strange ears. Several of the Illyrian guards glanced at one another. Seris allowed a faint smile. The main console chimed again. New information appeared across the display. Genetic sequence. Match 17% royal line compatibility. The chief scientist frowned. That percentage should not be possible. Wesley looked up. Is 17 good or bad? The scientist answered carefully. It means your genetic markers partially align with the Illyrian royal lineage. Wesley slowly pointed at Seris. You mean her royal lineage? Yes. Wesley covered his face with both hands. I knew I should have stayed in bed today. One of the guards tried very hard not to laugh. Seris stepped closer to the hologram, studying the sequence more carefully. The markers are ancient, she said quietly. Older than my reign, possibly older than my grandmother's. The historian nodded. The Aurora program began during the reign of Queen Seris. Wesley peeked between his fingers. Please tell me that name doesn't appear anywhere in my family records. The historian checked the archive. Actually, Wesley immediately dropped his hands. No, stop. Don't say it. The historian looked uncomfortable. There is a partial match in the historical logs. Wesley leaned back again, staring at the ceiling. So somewhere in the distant past, he said slowly, an alien queen may have been involved in my family history. Seris tilted her head slightly. That possibility seems increasingly likely. Wesley exhaled. All right, new rule. Everyone looked at him. If anyone here suggests that I might be distant alien royalty, I am officially resigning from this conversation. A small diagnostic drone drifted closer and projected another line of data. Analysis update. Latent genetic sequence detected. The chief scientist frowned. That sequence is dormant. Seris looked at the display. What does it do? The scientist hesitated. We are not entirely certain. Wesley raised a hand again. If the answer involves mysterious powers activating at a dramatic moment, he said, I would like to politely decline. The room grew quiet as the scientists examined the new sequence. Seris studied Wesley again, her golden eyes thoughtful rather than suspicious now. You appear remarkably calm, she said. Wesley shrugged. I repair broken doors for a living. At some point, you learn that unexpected things happen. Seris glanced toward the open royal door. You opened the most secure door in the Illyrian Dominion. Wesley nodded slowly. Yes. Seris crossed her arms. That suggests you may not be as ordinary as you believe? Wesley thought about that for a moment. Then he sighed. Your Majesty, he said, I would be perfectly happy returning to a life where the most complicated mystery I deal with is why the coffee machine on deck 12 keeps screaming. The quiet hum of Apex Prime's central systems filled the chamber as the investigation continued. Floating consoles drifted around the room, their pale blue lights reflecting off polished metallic walls. The royal quarters had slowly transformed into a temporary science laboratory, and Wesley Fox had somehow become its most confusing research subject. Wesley leaned against the edge of the diagnostic table, watching a swarm of tiny analysis drones circle around a floating strand of glowing DNA. Each drone emitted narrow beams of scanning light, as if the machines themselves were trying to understand how one ordinary technician had wandered into the middle of an ancient genetic mystery. Just to confirm, Wesley said, pointing at the holographic strand, that glowing spiral is still my DNA, correct? The chief scientist nodded without looking away from his console. Yes. And the weird alien symbols inside it are normal? No. Wesley sighed. Fantastic. Across the room, Queen Seris studied the projection quietly. Her posture remained perfectly composed, but the slight movement of her long ears betrayed deep thought. The glowing helix slowly rotated between them, revealing small clusters of highlighted sequences. These are the markers, the scientist said, enlarging one section. They originate from the Aurora program. The projection zoomed in further. A chain of symbols pulsed faintly. Seris stepped closer. They appear dormant, she observed. Yes, the scientist replied. Inactive genetic instructions. Wesley crossed his arms. Dormant sounds peaceful. Let's keep them that way. Another scientist adjusted a scanner and frowned. That may not be possible. Wesley blinked. I'm starting to dislike the tone of this meeting. The scanner projected a new data layer. A faint pulse traveled along the DNA sequence, like a slow electrical signal. It is reacting to Illyrian technology, the scientist explained. Wesley stared at the display. Reacting how? The scientist hesitated. It appears to recognize it. Wesley rubbed his temples. So my DNA now recognizes alien machines. The scientist nodded. That would explain the door. Wesley groaned quietly. That door is ruining my entire week. Seris turned toward him. You seem very concerned. Your Majesty, Wesley said, this morning my biggest responsibility was replacing a faulty coolant valve on Deck 9. Now I'm apparently walking around with royal alien genetics hiding in my cells. He gestured toward the hologram. That's a very aggressive career change. One of the younger technicians snorted softly before quickly pretending to study his console. Seris watched Wesley carefully. Does this frighten you? Wesley thought about that question for a moment. Not exactly, he admitted. Mostly it confuses me. The main console chimed again. The analysis drones rearranged themselves and projected another diagnostic scan across Wesley's biological profile. A thin glowing line highlighted a section of the dormant sequence. The chief scientist leaned closer. That region wasn't active before. Seris stepped forward immediately. What triggered it? The scientist checked the environmental sensors. Proximity to Illyrian royal biometrics. Wesley pointed slowly at Seris. You mean standing near the Queen? Yes. Wesley sighed again. Of course it does. The scientist continued studying the display. The sequence is stabilizing. Stabilizing what? Wesley asked. Your compatibility with Illyrian technology. Wesley looked around the room. I would like to officially clarify that I did not request compatibility with alien royal technology. A small security drone drifted closer and projected another line of system data. Nearby Illyrian systems responding to Wesley's genetic signal were being logged across the station. Door sensors, navigation terminals, even small environmental control panels. Wesley stared at the list. Please tell me I cannot accidentally pilot the station? The chief scientist answered immediately. You cannot. Wesley exhaled in relief. However, the scientist added, certain high-level systems may recognize your genetic markers. Wesley slowly looked up. Define certain. The scientist hesitated. Systems connected to the Royal Command Network. Wesley leaned back against the table again. I'm going to need a larger cup of coffee. Seris studied the diagnostic results with growing interest rather than alarm. Your genetic sequence is not random, she said quietly. The scientist nodded. No, it was designed. Wesley tilted his head. 300 years ago. Yes. And somehow that design ended up inside me. Yes. Wesley looked at the ceiling again. Well, whoever planned that had excellent long-term patience. One of the guards near the door finally spoke. What does this mean for the Queen's security? The chief scientist answered carefully. At the moment, Technician Fox represents no threat. Wesley raised a hand. I appreciate that vote of confidence. The scientist continued. In fact, the genetic sequence appears unusually stable. Seris looked at Wesley again. You may be the first successful continuation of the Aurora lineage. Wesley blinked. That sounds important. It is. Wesley thought about that for a moment. Then he shrugged. Does it come with extra paperwork? Seris smiled faintly. You have no idea. Wesley groaned quietly. I knew I should have taken that job repairing cargo drones instead. The investigation did not end that day. In fact, it grew larger, quieter, and somehow more complicated. By the time the artificial night cycle of Apex Prime dimmed the station lights, half the Royal Science Division had quietly relocated to the Queen sector. Portable laboratories filled the once peaceful corridor, and every scanner in the room seemed determined to learn something new about Wesley Fox, whether he approved or not. Wesley sat in a floating diagnostic chair, while a thin beam of blue light slowly scanned across his arm. He watched the machine work for a moment, then he sighed. You know, he said, when people said space station jobs were exciting, I assumed they meant occasional meteor impacts, not surprise alien ancestry. The Illyrian scientist operating the scanner barely looked up. Please hold still. I have been holding still for 30 minutes. Yes, that feels excessive. Across the room, Queen Seris stood beside a large holographic display showing the evolving analysis of Wesley's genetic structure. The glowing strand of DNA continued rotating slowly, but now several sections were illuminated. Her long ears tilted slightly as she studied the pattern. "These sequences are growing more active," she said. The chief scientist nodded. "They respond to Illyrian systems?" Wesley raised a finger. "I would like to remind everyone that I did not request my cells to start interacting with alien technology." The scanner beeped. The scientist glanced at the result. "Fascinating." Wesley frowned. "That word has been used several times today, and it never leads anywhere comforting." The scientist turned the display toward the others. "His genetic markers are stabilizing under environmental exposure." Seris looked up. "Meaning?" "Meaning the dormant sequence is adapting to the station." Wesley blinked slowly. "Adapting how?" The scientist zoomed in on the DNA display. Tiny pulses of light traveled through several sections of the strand. These sequences were designed to respond to Illyrian biological signals. Wesley pointed at Seris. "So standing near the Queen is basically activating old alien code inside my body." The scientist nodded. "Yes." Wesley leaned back in the chair. "That feels like something my doctor should have mentioned earlier." Seris allowed a quiet smile. "You appear surprisingly calm." Wesley shrugged. "Panic seems inefficient." The scanner finished its cycle and floated away. Wesley stepped out of the chair and stretched his arms. Across the chamber, another console chimed. One of the engineers looked up in surprise. "Something just happened." Wesley immediately froze. "That sentence makes me nervous." The engineer turned the display so everyone could see. A nearby terminal in the corridor had activated, without anyone touching it. The security feed showed a small environmental control panel glowing faintly. Wesley pointed at the screen. "Please tell me that's a coincidence." The engineer shook his head. "The system recognized your genetic signal." Wesley slowly turned toward Seris. "Your Majesty, am I accidentally controlling parts of your space station?" Seris studied the data calmly. "Not controlling." Wesley raised an eyebrow. "Influencing." The scientist nodded. "That would be more accurate." Wesley rubbed his forehead. "Great. I influence doors now." One of the guards near the wall muttered quietly, "At least it is only doors." Wesley heard him. "That is not reassuring." The console chimed again. Another system notification appeared. Several maintenance panels across the station had briefly registered Wesley's genetic pattern when he passed nearby earlier in the day. Wesley stared at the list. "Wait a minute." The scientist looked up. "What?" Wesley pointed at the timestamp. "That happened before we discovered the DNA sequence." The room went quiet. Seris looked closer at the display. "You are correct." The scientist frowned. "That suggests the activation began earlier." Wesley thought about that, then his eyes widened slightly. "Earlier, like when I touched the door scanner." The scientist nodded slowly. "That may have triggered the dormant sequence." Wesley groaned softly. "So the door didn't just open?" "No. It woke something up." "Yes." Wesley looked around the room. "I knew I should have just called the repair drone." Seris studied him carefully. "You activated a program created centuries ago." Wesley shrugged weakly. "I was just testing a fingerprint reader." The Queen's golden eyes reflected the soft glow of the holographic displays. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "your arrival here was not entirely accidental." Wesley stared at her. "Your Majesty," he said, "if fate wanted to pick someone important for this job, it made a terrible choice." Seris smiled faintly. "I am not so sure." At that moment, another console chimed loudly. Everyone turned. The station's central archive system had just unlocked a sealed historical file. On the screen appeared a title none of the scientists had expected to see again. Project Aurora, Succession Protocol. Wesley slowly leaned toward the display. "Please tell me that file does not involve me inheriting anything." No one answered, which worried him far more than if they had. The words on the central display remained suspended in the air like a quiet challenge. Project Aurora, Succession Protocol. For a long moment, nobody in the room spoke. The soft hum of Apex Prime's reactors echoed faintly through the walls, and somewhere in the corridor a maintenance drone passed by without realizing it had just witnessed the discovery of a 3-century-old secret. Wesley Fox slowly leaned closer to the screen. All right, he said cautiously. Before anyone opens that file, I would like to say something important. The chief scientist glanced at him. What is it? If the words royal heir appear anywhere in there, Wesley continued, I am immediately resigning from whatever job I apparently have now. One of the younger technicians snorted. Queen Seris remained calm, though the slight tilt of her long ears showed curiosity rather than alarm. Open it, she said. The archive responded instantly. Lines of ancient Illyrian text unfolded across the display, followed by an old holographic recording. A figure appeared in the projection, an Illyrian woman wearing ceremonial armor and a crown shaped like branching silver leaves. The historian gasped quietly. Queen Talrus. The recording flickered slightly as the ancient queen began speaking in the Illyrian language. The station's translator converted the message into clear Galactic standard. To the future guardians of the Dominion, the recording said, this message exists only if the Aurora lineage has survived. The scientists exchanged stunned glances. Talrus continued, the Aurora program was never designed to produce rulers. It was created to ensure that our people would never again see humans as strangers. The hologram shifted, displaying genetic diagrams nearly identical to the ones floating above Wesley's head. Our scientists discovered that even a small fragment of shared biology could create understanding between species. The program was ended before its success could be proven. Yet I believe the lineage will endure. Wesley raised a finger slowly. Can I just say that ancient queens have a very dramatic way of leaving instructions? The recording continued. If one day the Aurora bloodline awakens, the individual will possess the ability to interact with Illyrian technology as one of our own. They will not be our ruler, but they will be our bridge. The room grew quiet. The hologram faded, leaving only the genetic data hovering in the air. Wesley blinked. Bridge? The chief scientist nodded slowly. The program was never about succession. Wesley exhaled loudly. Oh, thank goodness. Seris looked at him. You sound relieved. I was very worried I might accidentally inherit a throne. The historian smiled faintly. No throne. Wesley nodded. Excellent. Thrones sound like a lot of paperwork. The scientist turned back to the DNA display. The Aurora sequence was designed to activate only if a descendant encountered Illyrian royal systems. Wesley pointed at the door behind them. So the scanner triggered it. Yes. And now my cells think they're part of the Illyrian network. Essentially, Wesley rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Well, that explains the doors. Seris studied him carefully. For centuries, our two civilizations have struggled to trust one another, she said quietly. Yet your existence proves that connection was always possible. Wesley shrugged. I was mostly trying to fix a security panel. Seris smiled slightly. History often begins with small accidents. The chief scientist finished reviewing the data. The Aurora sequence is stable. It will not continue expanding or altering your biology. Wesley raised an eyebrow. That is the best sentence I have heard today. The scientist nodded. However, you will likely remain compatible with Illyrian systems. Wesley glanced around the room. So doors will keep opening for me. Yes. Wesley folded his arms. I suppose there are worse superpowers. One of the guards spoke quietly. You could access restricted areas. Wesley immediately shook his head. No, absolutely not. I have learned today that curiosity leads to complicated conversations with queens. Seris laughed softly. The tension that had filled the room for hours finally began to dissolve. Outside the royal chamber, the massive station continued orbiting its quiet blue giant planet as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Wesley walked slowly toward the doorway where everything had started. The biometric panel still glowed faintly beside the frame. He looked at it. Then he placed his finger against the scanner. Access verified. The door opened smoothly. Wesley turned back toward Seris. Well, he said, at least the repair test was successful. Seris approached the doorway beside him. The violet light of the corridor reflected in her golden eyes. For 3 centuries, she said, our people believed the Aurora program failed. Wesley looked down the corridor, thinking about everything that had happened in a single day. I think, he said slowly, It just took a long time to finish. Seris nodded. A bridge does not belong entirely to either side. Wesley smiled. Which means I still get to keep my job, right? Seris tilted her head slightly. You repaired the Queen's security system. Accidentally. You uncovered a forgotten chapter of Illyrian history. Also accidentally. Seris allowed a small, amused smile. In that case, Technician Fox, I believe Apex Prime would be foolish to lose its most unusual engineer. Wesley relaxed. That's good. The Queen studied him for another moment. Besides, she added calmly, someone must make sure the doors behave properly. Wesley looked at the scanner again. Agreed. Then he glanced down the long corridor of the royal sector, once the most intimidating place on the station, now strangely familiar. He had arrived that morning as an ordinary technician, fixing broken machines. Now he understood something far larger. Sometimes the galaxy hid its most important connections in the quietest places, in forgotten experiments, ancient archives, and the fingerprints of someone who thought they were completely ordinary. Wesley stepped into the corridor and stretched his arms. All right, he said cheerfully. Who's ready to fix that screaming coffee machine on deck 12?